Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
My boss stood there, smirking as he told me to pack my things. He thought he'd won, stealing the software I'd spent 2 years perfecting. The company owns all your work now, he said, relishing every word. I just smiled and said, of course, as I walked out the door. What he didn't know was that I'd planted something in the code, a little surprise set to activate in exactly 30 days. What happened next would leave him, and the entire company, speechless. It all started on a Monday morning that was unremarkable in every way, until it wasn't. I arrived at the office with my usual routine, coffee in hand, headphones on, and my mind buzzing with ideas for the final tweaks to the software I'd been developing for the past 2 years. This wasn't just another project, it was my passion, a revolutionary piece of software that streamlined data analytics, simplifying complex workflows in ways no other tool could match. I'd poured everything into it. Long nights, countless weekends, even parts of my own savings had gone into refining the algorithms. I knew it wasn't just a step forward for the company. It was a leap for the entire industry. By mid-morning, I was deep into refining the UI when I got a message from Greg's assistant. Mr. Taylor would like to see you in his office, it read. Greg Taylor, my boss, wasn't exactly known for his sunny disposition. In fact, he was the kind of guy who took credit for the work of others and acted like he was doing you a favor by letting you keep your job. Still, I figured it was just a routine check-in. When I walked into his office, the air felt different. Greg was leaning back in his oversized leather chair, his fingers steepled under his chin, a grin on his face that immediately put me on edge. Beside him sat a man in a gray suit, flipping through a stack of papers. A lawyer, I realized with a sinking feeling. Pack your things, Greg said, his tone dripping with artificial concern. You're fired. I blinked, stunned. Excuse me? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Greg didn't miss a beat. You heard me, he said, leaning forward now. The company has decided to move in a different direction. Your services are no longer needed. I opened my mouth to protest, but he cut me off. And don't think about taking any of your work with you. The company owns everything you've developed here. It's all ours now. His grin widened, like he was savoring the moment. It wasn't just the words that hit me. It was the way he said them, like he'd been waiting for this. I realized then that this wasn't a decision made by the higher-ups. This was Greg's doing. He wanted my project, and he didn't care how many rules he had to bend or break to get it. The lawyer slid a sheet of paper across the desk. Sign this, he said, his tone brisk. It's a non-disclosure agreement. Standard procedure. I glanced at it, barely registering the legal jargon. My thoughts were racing too fast. I knew the software inside and out, every line of code, every function. But Greg didn't. He wouldn't understand the intricacies of what he'd just stolen. I swallowed the anger bubbling in my throat and forced a calm smile. Of course, I said, picking up the pen. I signed the paper without hesitation, knowing that Greg had no idea what was really going on in my head. Good decision, Greg said smugly. Now go ahead and clear out your desk. Security will escort you out. I didn't say another word. As I left his office, I could feel his eyes on my back, probably imagining himself as the company's next big hero, the man who would take credit for my work and ride it all the way to the top. What Greg didn't know was that I'd planned for this moment. As I packed up my desk, my mind buzzed with the details of what I'd built into the software, a failsafe, buried deep in the code, that would activate if someone tried to use the program without the proper developer credentials. It wasn't designed to be malicious, just a safeguard to prevent unauthorized access. But now it would serve a different purpose. Greg thought he'd won. He thought he could steal my work and cast me aside without consequence. But as I walked out of that office for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. The clock had started ticking, and in 30 days, Greg would find out just how wrong he was. As I packed up my belongings, I could feel the weight of my coworkers' stares. Some looked confused, others sympathetic, but no one dared to approach. It was as though I'd become a ghost before I'd even left the building. I ignored the pang of embarrassment in my chest and focused on what mattered. I had a plan, and Greg had no idea what was coming. Greg had been circling my project like a shark for months. At every team meeting, he'd ask pointed questions about its functionality, often under the guise of gaining a better understanding. At the time, I dismissed it as an annoying habit of a micromanaging boss. Now, in hindsight, it was clear he'd been plotting this move for a long time. But Greg had one fatal flaw. He didn't understand the intricacies of the code. He was good at buzzwords and presentations, sure, but the actual technical work was far beyond his skill set. And that was where my failsafe came in. Months earlier, when I first suspected that Greg might try to dig into my files without permission, I'd added a small, hidden feature to the software. It wasn't malicious, at least not intentionally. It was a safeguard, designed to protect my work from unauthorized use. The failsafe was simple in theory, but brilliant in execution. It allowed the program to function as intended, but after 30 days, it would shut down completely unless the user entered a unique developer key. That key, of course, was something only I had, and I hadn't just written it down somewhere easy to find. I'd stored it on an encrypted USB drive that was sitting in my apartment, safely out of Greg's reach. As I finished packing, I made a point to leave behind the company-issued USB drive where I'd stored earlier versions of the software. It was deliberate, a breadcrumb I knew Greg would latch onto. I wanted him to believe he'd taken everything from me. I couldn't help but smile as I walked out the door for the last time. To Greg and his lawyer, I probably looked like I'd accepted defeat, resigned to the fact that my work was no longer mine. But in reality, I never felt more in control. The countdown had already begun. The first few days after I was fired were a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me was furious at the injustice of it all. 2 years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and more sacrifices than I cared to count, all stolen by a man who thought he could get away with it. But another part of me felt exhilarated. I'd always believed in the software's potential, but now, I was about to test it in a way I never anticipated. Would the failsafe work as intended? Would Greg realize too late that he'd made a catastrophic mistake? The possibilities kept me awake at night, but not out of fear, out of anticipation. I spent the next few days preparing for what I knew was coming. I backed up my personal files, including every iteration of the software I'd ever worked on, and set up a secure remote monitoring system to keep an eye on the program's usage. It wasn't illegal. I wasn't accessing anything beyond what was within my rights as the original developer. Through the monitoring tool, I watched as Greg's team began implementing the software across the company's network. They moved quickly, likely under Greg's orders to roll it out before anyone started asking too many questions. Within a week, the software was fully integrated, and I could see the client activations piling up in real time. Each activation added to the countdown. I knew exactly when the failsafe would trigger, and I could barely contain my anticipation. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing exactly when the impact would occur. On day 10, Greg scheduled a company-wide presentation to showcase the software's capabilities. One of my former coworkers, Lisa, sent me a text. "Lisa, Greg's really milking it. Just took credit for the whole project in the meeting. Called it his brainchild." I stared at the message, my stomach churning with anger. But then I reminded myself, patience. Greg might be basking in stolen glory now, but it wouldn't last. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I kept tabs on the software's rollout through my monitoring tool and occasional updates from Lisa. By day 25, it was clear that Greg was feeling untouchable. The company had started pitching the software to investors, and early feedback from clients was glowing. But Greg didn't understand the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. On day 28, Lisa texted me again. "Lisa, big investor meeting on Friday. They're saying it's a game changer. Greg's acting like he's about to win an award." Me, Friday, huh? Perfect timing. She didn't respond immediately, but a few minutes later, another text came through. "Lisa, wait. You're up to something, are you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Greg had no idea that his perfect pitch to investors was about to go horribly wrong. All I had to do was wait. The week following my firing was both surreal and strangely thrilling. I had expected to feel angry, bitter even, but what lingered most was a sense of anticipation. Greg had made his move, but he had no idea I still had access to everything that mattered. Thanks to the remote monitoring tool I'd discreetly installed, I could see exactly how the software was being used. Every time Greg's team launched it or activated a new client license, the tool quietly logged the event and updated the countdown. Day by day, the clock ticked closer to 30. From what my trusted sources inside the company told me, Greg was riding high. He'd called an emergency board meeting just 2 days after I'd left, spinning the software as his own groundbreaking creation. "He's acting like he wrote every line of code himself," Lisa told me during one of our phone calls. Lisa had been a close ally of mine during my time at the company, and while she couldn't risk openly siding with me, she made sure I knew everything that was happening behind the scenes. "He's calling it a game changer," Lisa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You'd think he discovered fire the way he's carrying on." It didn't surprise me. Greg wasn't one to miss an opportunity to grandstand. especially if it meant taking credit for someone else's work. But while he basked in stolen glory, I stayed quiet. Patience was key. As the days passed, I watched the company fully integrate the software into its operations. Greg and his team wasted no time pitching it to clients, presenting it as the next big thing in data analytics. Through my monitoring tool, I could see the growing list of activations. It was almost comical how much faith they had in something they didn't fully understand. Every activation brought the failsafe closer to triggering, and Greg was too busy celebrating his success to notice the cracks beneath the surface. But it wasn't just clients who were buying into the hype. Greg had managed to attract the attention of a high-profile investor, a tech mogul with deep pockets and a reputation for backing innovative solutions. Word spread quickly within the company that this investor was ready to pour millions into the software's expansion. Lisa called me again, her tone a mix of exasperation and amusement. "You should have seen him in the last meeting," she said. Greg was practically vibrating with excitement. "He's convinced this investor deal is going to cement his legacy." "Perfect," I said, leaning back in my chair. Lisa paused. "You're up to something, aren't you?" "Just trust me," I replied. By day 25, the countdown was nearly complete. The software was now a critical part of the company's operations, and Greg had doubled down on his promises to clients and investors. Lisa sent me a text that morning. "Investor meeting scheduled for Friday. They're rolling out a big demo. This is it, isn't it?" I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked the monitoring tool. Everything was on track. The failsafe was primed to activate during the investor demo, ensuring maximum impact. The investor meeting was scheduled for noon on Friday, a time carefully chosen to maximize visibility and attendance. Executives, board members, and even key clients were expected to join. It was Greg's moment to shine, or so he thought. The night before the meeting, I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop. I've been monitoring the system so closely that I could practically recite the usage logs from memory. Part of me wondered if Greg had any inkling of what was about to happen. But then I remembered his arrogance, the way he'd smirked when he fired me, so sure that he'd won. He had no idea that I was still watching, waiting for the moment when everything he'd stolen would crumble in his hands. As I shut my laptop for the night, I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The next day, Greg would step into that boardroom, ready to present the software as the company's crowning achievement. He'd smile, shake hands, and bask in the praise of everyone who believed in his lies. And then, just as the demo reached its peak, the failsafe would trigger. 30 days had never felt so satisfying. The morning of day 30 started quietly, but the anticipation in my chest was anything but calm. I woke up early, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat down at my desk, opening my laptop like it was just another workday. Except today, I wasn't working. I was waiting. The remote monitoring tool was already open, the countdown clock ticking down the final minutes. Through the logs, I could see that Greg's team had been running last-minute tests all night, likely fine-tuning their big demonstration for the investor meeting scheduled at noon. Lisa had texted me late the night before, her message brief but telling. The big day. "Wish I could see Greg's face when this all goes down." I smiled as I reread her message. I couldn't see Greg's face in real time, but I had a pretty good idea of what it would look like in about an hour. By 11:30 a.m., the boardroom was packed. Executives, department heads, and the high-profile investor himself were all gathered around a massive screen, waiting for Greg to showcase the company's crowning achievement. Lisa had managed to snap a quick photo and send it my way. Greg, standing at the head of the table, his trademark smirk firmly in place. The caption read, "He's loving the attention. Hope he's ready for what's coming." I checked the monitoring tool one last time. Everything was in place. The software was fully integrated, and every active client account was tied directly to the system. At exactly noon, the failsafe would activate. The moment arrived quietly. I was sitting at my desk, sipping my coffee, as the countdown reached 0. A small notification popped up on my screen. Failsafe activated. And then chaos. The first sign of trouble came in the form of error messages. Cryptic warnings began appearing on the dashboards of every client using the software, their screens filling with red text and flashing alerts. Within seconds, the program's core systems started unraveling. One by one, the client activations in the monitoring tool began to blink offline, each one marked with a red error code. The data analytics dashboards that had been the software's key selling point became inaccessible, replaced by a single message: unauthorized access detected. System locked. At home, I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. It had worked. My phone buzzed with incoming messages. Lisa's first text came in just after noon. Holy crap. The system just crashed mid-demo. Greg looks like he's about to pass out. A minute later, clients are calling nonstop. Nobody can access their data. The investor just walked out. Didn't even say a word. And then, the piece de resistance. A photo of Greg in the boardroom, his face pale and his hands gripping the edge of the table like it might hold him up. The confidence he'd exuded in every meeting, every presentation, was gone. I couldn't help but laugh. Greg, the man who thought he could steal my work and claim it as his own, was finally seeing the consequences of his arrogance. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within minutes, word of the system failure had spread throughout the company. Clients were livid, bombarding the support team with demands for answers. Greg, who had promised them a flawless product, now found himself scrambling to explain what had gone wrong. But there was no fixing this. Without my developer key, the software was dead. The system had locked itself down completely, and no amount of troubleshooting or IT wizardry would bring it back online. I received another text from Lisa an hour later. Greg just tried to pin this on the IT team. They're furious. One of them walked out in the middle of the meeting. It was clear that Greg's carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing around him. The investor, who had been ready to sign a multi-million-dollar deal, was gone. The board, who had placed their faith in Greg's leadership, was now demanding answers. By the end of the day, Lisa called me, her voice barely containing her glee. "You've got no idea how bad it is over here," she said. Greg's locked in his office. Security had to escort a client rep out of the building because they were yelling so much. And the board is demanding an emergency meeting tomorrow. I smiled, though I try to keep my tone neutral. "Sounds like a rough day." "That's putting it mildly," Lisa said, laughing. "Whatever you did, it worked. Greg's finally getting what he deserves." As we ended the call, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Greg had stolen my work thinking he could get away with it. But now, he was the one left empty-handed, scrambling to clean up a mess he couldn't fix. The best part? This was only the beginning. By the time the software crash had reached its peak, the entire company was in shambles. I sat at home, scrolling through updates from Lisa and piecing together what must have been a truly spectacular meltdown. Greg's carefully crafted facade of control had cracked, and underneath was a man clearly in over his head. That afternoon, Lisa sent me the first text of the day. "Emergency meeting just called." Greg's panicking. Board's pissed. I smirked at my phone. It didn't take a genius to predict what would happen next. Greg's entire career had been built on lies, and with the software dead, those lies were crumbling around him. From what Lisa told me, Greg had spent the morning pacing the boardroom, yelling at the IT department to just fix it. But of course, there was nothing they could do. The failsafe had locked the software down completely, and without the developer key, even the most skilled engineers in the world wouldn't be able to bring it back online. By noon, the investor who had been the centerpiece of Greg's grand pitch had walked out of the building without a word. A few hours later, 2 major clients had pulled their contracts, furious that the system they'd been promised was now a useless heap of code. The company's stock price, already teetering from past missteps, plummeted within hours of the crash. News of the failure spread quickly, and by the end of the day, headlines like "Tech Giant Faces Catastrophic System Failure" were making their rounds online. Lisa called me that evening, her voice giddy with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, barely able to contain her laughter. "Greg's office door has been closed all afternoon. He's in there with the CFO and 2 lawyers. Everyone else is scrambling to put out fires." I leaned back in my chair, listening as she recounted the day's events. "The IT guys are threatening to quit," Lisa continued. "They're saying Greg's trying to pin the blame on them, but everyone knows he's full of crap. And get this, he actually tried to call the investor back to reschedule the meeting. They told him not to bother." I laughed, shaking my head. "He really thought he could smooth this over, didn't he?" "Yep," Lisa said. "But the board isn't buying it. They're calling another meeting tomorrow morning. And word is, Greg's going to have to explain himself." I could almost picture the scene. Greg, sitting at the head of the table, trying to spin the situation while the board grilled him about how and why the company's flagship software had imploded so spectacularly. As the evening went on, more updates trickled in. Another text from Lisa. "Client reps are furious." One guy actually threw his phone in the middle of a meeting. Security had to step in. The chaos was almost too good to be true. For years, Greg had skated by on his ability to charm and manipulate people, taking credit for the work of others and blaming his mistakes on anyone but himself. But now, faced with a disaster he couldn't control, his house of cards was finally collapsing. By the time I went to bed, the company was already trending on social media, and the hashtag software fail was picking up steam. Lisa sent me one last update before I turned off my phone. Greg's blaming everyone but himself. You really broke him. The next morning, I woke up to more messages. Lisa, who had a knack for being in the right place at the right time, had managed to overhear some of the board meeting. They're grilling him, she said in her first text, asking why he fired you, why the software failed, and why there's no backup plan. He doesn't have answers. From what I gathered, Greg had tried to dodge responsibility by pointing fingers at the IT department, claiming they'd failed to implement the system properly. But the board wasn't buying it. They wanted concrete explanations, and Greg had none. By noon, the first major fallout hit. Greg was officially removed from his position as CEO. The announcement was made quietly at first, but it didn't take long for the news to leak. By the end of the day, articles about his firing were circulating online, painting him as the man responsible for one of the biggest corporate failures in recent history. Lisa called me again that evening, her voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. He's gone, she said. They kicked him out of the building this afternoon. He looked like he was about to cry. Good riddance, I replied. Yeah, but now everyone's wondering what happens next, Lisa said. The board's scrambling to find someone to clean up the mess. But honestly, I don't think there's much left to save. I hung up the phone feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Greg had finally gotten what he deserved, and the company that had allowed him to steal my work was paying the price. But another part of me felt a sense of closure. The chaos was over, and I could finally move on. As I sat on my couch that night, scrolling through news articles about the scandal, I couldn't help but smile. Greg had stolen my work, thinking he could take credit for my success. But in the end, his greed and arrogance had been his undoing. And the best part? I hadn't even needed to lift a finger to finish the job. 3 days after Greg's spectacular downfall, my phone rang. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Hello, I said, already suspicious. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice I hadn't expected to hear. It's Greg. Hearing his name made my stomach churn, but I kept my tone neutral. Greg, I said flatly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Listen, he began, his voice strained and tinged with desperation. We're having some issues with the software. The word issues almost made me laugh out loud. The understatement was so absurd I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from snapping back. But I let him continue. I was wondering, he said hesitantly, if you'd be willing to come in and help us sort it out. Just, as a consultant or something. I leaned back in my chair, the satisfaction already starting to creep in. Oh, you mean the software you said belonged to the company? I replied, my tone icy. The same software you fired me over? Greg hesitated. Look, I know how it sounds, he said, clearly trying to keep his composure. But we're in a tough spot here, and... A tough spot? I interrupted, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Gee, I can't imagine why. I mean, you fired the person who built the system, claimed it as your own, and now you want me to fix it? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Greg finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I made a mistake, he admitted. We need your help. Please. Hearing those words from Greg, the man who had smirked as he fired me, who had stolen my work without a second thought, was almost surreal. I'd imagined this moment countless times, but nothing could have prepared me for the satisfaction of actually hearing him grovel. I'm afraid I can't do that, I said calmly. You made it very clear that the company owns everything, remember? I'm just following your rules. Wait, Greg said quickly, panic creeping into his voice. Can we at least talk about... I didn't let him finish. Goodbye, Greg, I said, cutting him off before hanging up. The call left me feeling both vindicated and oddly reflective. For years, Greg had wielded his power like a weapon, using his position to manipulate and exploit others. He'd taken my work, my passion, and tried to claim it as his own. And now, he was the one left scrambling, his empire crumbling around him. But despite the satisfaction, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Greg's downfall wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. He'd made his bed, and now he was being forced to lie in it. Over the next few days, the fallout from the crash continued to ripple through the company. Lisa kept me updated, her messages a mix of disbelief and schadenfreude. Lisa, Greg's a mess. Board's cutting ties completely. He's out for good. Me, no surprise there. Lisa, They're begging the IT team to salvage what they can, but everyone knows it's hopeless. Clients are dropping like flies. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. A week later, I got another call. This time, it was from one of the board members. "We'd like to offer you a consulting contract," the woman said, her tone overly polite, "to help us restore the software." I let her finish before replying. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline," I said. "The software was mine, and you let Greg take it from me. I'm not interested in fixing someone else's mess." There was a long pause. "Is there anything we can do to change your mind?" I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "You can license the software from me," I said. "But that's the only deal I'm willing to consider." The silence on the other end was deafening. "I'll send over the terms," I said, ending the call. Greg might have stolen my work, but he'd never understood its true value. And now, the company was learning that lesson the hard way. As for Greg, that was the last time I ever heard from him. Rumor had it he left the industry entirely, too humiliated by the scandal to salvage his reputation. It was a fitting end for a man who had built his career on lies. And as I sat back, watching the fallout from a distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. By the time a week had passed, Greg's carefully constructed facade was in shambles. The company's once ambitious future, built on the promises of the revolutionary software he had stolen, was disintegrating before everyone's eyes. The fallout from the crash had spread beyond the office walls, and now the truth was beginning to emerge. Lisa called me late on a Friday night, her voice charged with the kind of nervous energy that could only come from witnessing chaos firsthand. "You're not going to believe this," she said, practically breathless. "Try me," I replied, settling into my chair. "They found the failsafe," she said. "Greg's been trying to keep it quiet, but the IT team finally figured it out. The software locked itself down because of some developer key they don't have access to." I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Lisa laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Don't play coy. I know you did this." I didn't confirm or deny it, but the silence on my end must have said enough. "Anyway," Lisa continued, "the board is demanding answers, and Greg's completely cornered. They've been in meetings all day, and from what I've heard, it's not looking good for him." Over the weekend, the situation escalated. Clients were still furious, canceling contracts faster than the sales team could spin the narrative. The IT department, now fully aware of the failsafe, reported to the board that there was no way to restore the software without the developer key, and Greg had no idea where to find it. By Monday morning, Greg's lies began to unravel in spectacular fashion. The board, already losing patience with the cascading failures, demanded a full accounting of what had gone wrong. Greg, who had built his career on charm and manipulation, tried to spin the situation, but the facts were undeniable. He was forced to admit that he'd fired me, the lead developer, and taken credit for the project himself. He claimed it was a strategic decision, an attempt to streamline operations, but the board wasn't buying it. They wanted to know why the company's lifeline had been put in jeopardy and why Greg had failed to foresee the consequences of his actions. To make matters worse, the IT team had documented every step of their investigation, including their discovery of the failsafe. It was clear that Greg had neither the technical expertise to manage the software nor the foresight to ensure its stability. His incompetence was laid bare, and there was no one left to blame. The fallout was swift and brutal. By midweek, the board held an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. Lisa kept me updated in real time, her texts coming in rapid succession. "Lisa, they're ripping him apart." "Lisa, he just admitted he doesn't know how to fix it. This is bad." "Lisa, board's voting on his removal." "It's happening." The vote was unanimous. Greg was officially removed as CEO. The news broke internally first, but it didn't take long for word to spread beyond the company. By Thursday morning, the headlines were everywhere. Tech CEO fired amid scandal. Software crash exposes mismanagement. CEO's greed backfires. The software that shut down a company. Major investor pulls out after company fails to deliver promised tech. The articles painted a damning picture of Greg's tenure as CEO, highlighting his pattern of taking credit for others' work and the catastrophic consequences of his decisions. Reporters dug into his past, uncovering other instances of questionable behavior that had been swept under the rug. But the centerpiece of every story was the software crash. The revolutionary program that had promised to change the game had instead brought the company to its knees. All because Greg had fired the one person who could keep it running. For Greg, the public humiliation was devastating. The man who had once strutted through the office with an air of untouchable confidence was now the face of one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent memory. Lisa told me he'd been escorted out of the building by security, his belongings hastily packed into a box. "He looked like a ghost," she said. "I don't think he's coming back from this." It wasn't just his job that Greg lost. His reputation, his credibility, and his standing in the industry were all gone. No one wanted to be associated with a man whose greed and incompetence had destroyed an entire company's future. As for the company, it was struggling to stay afloat. With clients abandoning ship and no viable replacement for the software, the board was scrambling to salvage what little they could. Rumors of layoffs and restructuring were already circulating, and morale among the remaining employees was at an all-time low. I watched the drama unfold from a distance, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. Greg's confession hadn't just exposed his theft. It had validated everything I'd worked for. For 2 years, I'd poured my heart and soul into that project, and while it was bittersweet to see it become a symbol of Greg's failure, I knew the truth would have its day. As I scrolled through yet another article about the scandal, I couldn't help but smile. Greg had thought he could take what wasn't his and get away with it. Instead, his greed had been his undoing. And this was only the beginning. With Greg officially out of the picture, the company's leadership was in disarray. The board, scrambling to contain the fallout from the software crash, was desperate for solutions. It didn't take long for them to realize that there was only one person who could save the system. Me. The first email arrived on a Monday morning, carefully worded and oozing with faux professionalism. "We hope this message finds you well." It began before diving into the board's keen interest in collaborating with me to restore the software. It was followed by an invitation to a meeting with the remaining leadership team to discuss mutually beneficial solutions. I ignored it. The next day, a second email arrived, this one slightly more urgent in tone. It emphasized the company's respect for my expertise and their commitment to rectifying past misunderstandings. It ended with an offer to pay me a consulting fee for my assistance. I deleted it without replying. By Wednesday, they sent someone to call me directly. It was a woman from the board, her voice calm and carefully measured as she tried to convince me to meet with them. "We understand that the situation with Greg was mishandled," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We deeply regret the way things were handled and would like to make things right. Your contributions to the software were invaluable, and we would like to invite you back to help us recover." I let her talk for a while, listening to the carefully rehearsed pitch. She mentioned the importance of the software to their clients, the need to protect jobs within the company, and their willingness to compensate me generously for my time. When she finally finished, I responded with a calm but firm tone. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm not interested in returning to a company that allowed someone like Greg to steal my work and take credit for it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "We understand your frustration," she said finally. "But surely there must be something we can do to repair this relationship." That was when I decided to make my counteroffer. "I'm willing to license the software back to the company," I said, "under very specific terms." The woman hesitated. "License?" "Yes," I replied. "The software remains my intellectual property, and the company will pay a recurring licensing fee to use it. Additionally, any future modifications to the software must be approved by me or my team." She was silent for a moment, likely weighing the desperation of their situation against the cost of my terms. Finally, she sighed. "Send us your proposal," she said. The next few days were a flurry of negotiations. I worked with a lawyer to draft a licensing agreement that ensured I retained full ownership of the software while allowing the company limited rights to use it. The terms were non-negotiable: a substantial upfront payment, recurring annual fees, and strict conditions for any future use. It was a bold move, but I knew they didn't have a choice. The software was critical to their operations, and without it, they were dead in the water. By the end of the week, the deal was done. The board signed off on the agreement, and I walked away with not just a financial win, but a moral victory as well. The payout from the deal was more than enough to fund my next venture. I used the money to start my own business, a small but ambitious software development company focused on creating tools that genuinely help people. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the toxic corporate environment that had stifled my creativity, free from the shadow of people like Greg who thrived on stealing the work of others, and free to pursue projects that mattered to me. The company, meanwhile, struggled to recover. The licensing deal allowed them to keep the software running, but their reputation had taken a massive hit. Clients were hesitant to trust them, and the leadership team was still grappling with the aftermath of Greg's tenure. I didn't pay much attention to what happened to them after that. My focus was on building something new, something that reflected my values and vision. Looking back, the entire experience had been both a challenge and a revelation. It had shown me the worst of corporate greed, but also the strength I had to stand up for myself and my work. The company might have tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I was the one who walked away with the victory. And Greg? Well, I hadn't heard a word about him since his firing. Rumor had it he'd moved to another city and was trying to rebuild his career in a completely different industry. But that wasn't my concern. I had moved on, leaving Greg and his toxic influence in the past. And as I sat in my new office, surrounded by a team that valued my ideas and integrity, I knew I'd made the right choice. As I built my new life, Greg's unraveling became the stuff of whispered rumors and schadenfreude-fueled anecdotes. His downfall was as dramatic as it was inevitable, the perfect cautionary tale of greed and hubris gone wrong. The first crack in Greg's post-CEO life came almost immediately after his firing. The public nature of his removal had made him toxic in the tech industry. Articles about the software crash and the role his lies had played in it circulated widely, painting him as both incompetent and untrustworthy. His attempts to find a new job were, predictably, disastrous. Even companies that might have been willing to overlook a blemish or two on his record were hesitant to associate with someone who had been so thoroughly discredited. Greg, who had once walked into boardrooms with an air of invincibility, now found every door closed to him. I occasionally heard updates through the grapevine. Former colleagues who still had a taste for gossip would reach out, eager to share the latest on Greg's slow-motion train wreck. Did you hear? Lisa texted me one afternoon. Greg applied for a mid-level position at a startup. Didn't even get an interview. I smirked as I typed my reply. Guess charm only gets you so far when everyone knows you're a fraud. The most ironic twist came when Greg tried to start his own consulting firm. He pitched himself as an innovative leader with extensive experience in managing complex projects. Predictably, the venture flopped within months. No one wanted advice from a man whose last major project had ended in disaster. Then there was Amelia. Yes, the same Amelia who had sat smugly beside Greg in meetings, basking in the glow of his ill-gotten success. For a while, she stuck by him, perhaps thinking he'd bounce back or find another golden opportunity to exploit. But as the weeks turned into months and Greg's prospects dwindled, her patience wore thin. The breakup, as I heard it, was not a quiet one. Amelia left him, Lisa reported during one of our calls. She took the dog, half the furniture, and, get this, she posted a picture of her with some new guy on Instagram 2 days later. Wow, I said, laughing. That's cold. Yeah, well, she's not exactly known for her loyalty, Lisa replied. Guess Greg learned that the hard way. While Greg's life continued its downward spiral, the company I'd left behind slowly began to stabilize. The licensing deal I'd negotiated ensured the software remained operational, giving the board a lifeline to rebuild trust with their clients. I didn't pay much attention to their recovery. My focus was on my own ventures, but I couldn't help but notice the occasional headline about their efforts to repair their reputation. The software deal had been a win for them, but Greg's name remained forever tied to the scandal. No matter how much progress they made, the shadow of the crash lingered. Greg's actions had cost them millions in lost contracts, investor confidence, and brand equity. For years, his name was used as a warning in the industry, a prime example of what happens when greed and arrogance take precedence over integrity and competence. As for me, life had never been better. My new company thrived, built on principles that Greg could never have understood: collaboration, respect, and a commitment to creating meaningful, ethical work. One day, as I sat in my office reviewing a new project proposal, a thought struck me. It had been over a year since I'd last heard anything about Greg. Curious, I did a quick search online. What I found was underwhelming. Greg's social media profiles were either inactive or completely scrubbed, and his name only popped up in articles about the software crash. There was no mention of new ventures, no signs of a comeback. It seemed Greg had faded into obscurity, his once inflated ego deflated by the harsh realities of his own making. I leaned back in my chair, a small smile playing on my lips. Greg had tried to steal everything from me: my work, my reputation, my future. But in the end, he was the one who lost it all. And as I returned to reviewing I realized that his downfall wasn't just a victory for me. It was a reminder of the value of standing up for what's right. Greg's story had ended in disgrace, but mine was just beginning. The aftermath of everything with Greg and the company felt like both a blur and a distant memory. For months after the dust had settled, People would occasionally ask me how it felt to see someone like Greg fall so hard, or if I regretted the failsafe that had caused the crash. My answer was always the same. I didn't need to do anything except let him show the world who he really was. Looking back, I felt nothing but pride in how I'd handled myself. It would have been easy to lash out, to fight fire with fire, but instead I'd focused on protecting what mattered most: my work, my integrity, and my future. Greg had thought he could take all of that from me, but in the end, his greed and arrogance were his own undoing. Starting my own company had been the best decision I'd ever made. With the payout from the licensing deal, I'd been able to create something entirely my own. It was small but thriving, built on principles I believed in: collaboration, innovation, and respect. My team wasn't just a group of coworkers. They were people who shared my passion for creating meaningful software. One of the most rewarding parts of this new chapter in my life was mentoring young developers. I'd always been passionate about teaching, and now I had the platform to do it. I hosted workshops and one-on-one sessions, not just about coding, but about the realities of the tech industry. I wanted them to understand that their work had value, that they didn't have to accept being exploited or overshadowed by people like Greg. Protect your work, I'd tell them. Document everything, back up your files, and always know your worth. People will try to take advantage of you. Don't let them. One day, a young developer stayed after a workshop to ask me a question. "Do you ever regret what happened with your old company?" she asked hesitantly. I thought about it for a moment before replying. "No," I said. "It was a tough lesson, but it showed me what I was capable of." Sometimes the worst experiences teach you the most important things. She nodded thoughtfully, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Maybe what happened with Greg wasn't just about justice. It was about creating a story that could inspire others to stand up for themselves. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about Greg, not out of malice or curiosity, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. The last I'd heard, he was still struggling to rebuild his life. One of my former colleagues had mentioned in passing that Greg had tried to pitch a new business venture to some investors, but they'd turned him down, unwilling to associate with his tarnished reputation. "He's living in the suburbs now," Lisa had told me during one of our occasional catch-up calls. "No one in the industry will touch him. Honestly, I think he's done." It was strange to think about how drastically our paths had diverged. Greg had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he was the one who lost it all. Meanwhile, I'd found success, fulfillment, and the freedom to build a life on my own terms. One sunny afternoon, I found myself sitting in my office, sipping coffee as I reviewed the latest project my team had completed. The windows overlooked the city, its bustling streets a reminder of the endless opportunities ahead. I thought about the long nights I'd spent developing the software, the frustration of being fired, and the satisfaction of seeing justice play out in ways I could never have planned. But most of all, I thought about how I'd chosen to move forward instead of letting anger or bitterness hold me back. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in the form of revenge. It comes in the form of resilience, of watching someone dig their own grave while you rise above the chaos. As I set my coffee down and returned to my work, I couldn't help but smile. This was my life now, a life built not on what had been taken from me, but on what I'd created for myself. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.